Sometimes, it only takes a single moment for everything to change. A routine call, a prejudiced officer. But what happens when the person you least expect turns out to be someone powerful, someone you've been wrong all along about? Tonight's story is one of power, pride, and a life-altering mistake. A racist cop points a gun at a black woman and forces her out of her own home, unaware of the shocking truth about who she really is. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below and let us know. Remember to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The scorching sun beat down on the quiet suburban neighborhood as Officer Jake Mullins adjusted the weight of his gun belt, the thick leather digging into his waist. The streets were quiet save for the occasional rustle of a car passing by. The police cruiser hummed softly as he sat in the driver's seat, his fingers tapping impatiently on the steering wheel. His shift had been uneventful so far, a stark contrast to his usual desire for some action. He wasn't a fan of quiet days, not in his line of work, but today would be different, and he could feel it in his bones. Officer Mullins had never been a fan of change, particularly when it involved people he didn't understand. He had long harbored a deep-seated prejudice against people of color, something that clouded his judgment and shaped his views of the world. It was a side of him he kept buried deep, but it was always there, lurking beneath the surface. His life had been relatively simple until now, and he liked it that way. Clean, orderly, predictable. But that morning, he'd received a tip about an alleged drug dealer operating in the neighborhood, and it was the kind of tip he couldn't ignore. As he cruised past rows of neat houses, he spotted the house he'd been given in the tip, a modest two-story home with a cracked driveway and a few overgrown bushes. The house belonged to a woman named Maya Williams, a name that meant little to him, but to the informant, it was enough to stir suspicion. The tip had been vague, just enough to paint a target on Maya's back. She was a black woman, which in Mullins' mind was enough to make her a suspect. He parked the car at the curb, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the house. From what he could see, there were no signs of trouble, no loud music, no shouting, no signs of an ongoing drug deal. But the informant had said she was involved, and that was enough. He wasn't one to waste time, so he grabbed his radio and called for backup. The usual buzz of the dispatch station was replaced by a moment of silence before a response crackled through. Unit 232, backup is on the way. Proceed with caution. Mullins nodded to himself, his thoughts swirling. He wasn't going to wait. This was his chance to prove himself. His fingers tightened around the grip of his gun as he exited the vehicle, the leather of his boots striking the pavement with an authoritative stomp. He made his way toward the front door, the sound of his steps heavy in the still air. As he reached the porch, he hesitated for a moment, looking around. There were no signs of movement inside, but he could hear faint voices through the window. He knocked once, hard, with the back of his fist, his stance stiff and unwelcoming. The door opened, and there stood Maya Williams. She was in her late 30s, her dark skin glowing under the harsh light. Her eyes, though wide with confusion, held a calm that immediately irritated Officer Mullins. She didn't appear frightened. She didn't appear to be a person in danger, someone he could easily control. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady. "I'm Officer Mullins, and I'm here to ask a few questions," he replied, his voice clipped, deliberately cold. He didn't waste any time before stepping forward, his body blocking her from retreating back into the house. He didn't have a warrant, but in his mind he didn't need one. Maya wasn't going anywhere. "Step aside," he commanded, his tone growing more insistent. "I'm conducting an investigation." Maya stood her ground, her expression hardening. "You have no right to..." Before she could finish her sentence, Mullins stepped forward, pushing his way into the doorway with little regard for personal space. His gun was still holstered, but his hand hovered near it, a silent threat. Maya's heart raced, but she refused to back down. She had faced much worse in her life. People like Mullins didn't scare her. "Listen," Mullins said, his voice thick with authority. "I'm here to investigate, and I'm not leaving until I've done so." Maya's eyes narrowed, and she opened her mouth to protest, but she was cut off by the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. A figure emerged from the side of the house, her brother Tyrone. He was a tall, muscular man, his broad shoulders filling the doorway behind Maya. "What's going on here?" Tyrone asked, his voice low but his eyes scanning the situation carefully. "Stay inside, Tyrone," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. "I'll handle this." But Mullins wasn't interested in letting her handle anything. He had already made up his mind about Maya and her brother. They didn't belong here in this neighborhood. They were trouble, and he was going to make sure they knew it. "I said move," Mullins snapped, his hand now resting on his gun. He could feel the tension rising, but his mind was made up. Maya and Tyrone weren't going to get away with whatever they were doing. His fingers curled tighter around the grip of his gun, and his voice became colder. "You're both coming with me." But Maya wasn't backing down. Her eyes flared with anger as she took a step forward, her posture tall and unwavering. "You're making a mistake, officer," she said, her voice a mix of defiance and warning. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, Mullen's eyes met hers, and for the first time he felt a slight twinge of doubt, but it quickly passed. He had power here. He wasn't going to back off. His hand shot toward his gun. "Get out of the way now." Maya didn't flinch. She held her ground, but as Mullins moved toward her, the air around them seemed to grow heavier, more tense, charged with an unspoken battle of wills. In a split second, the officer pulled his gun from its holster and aimed it directly at her chest. "Move, or else," he growled. Maya's heartbeat surged in her chest as she realized the danger she was in. Yet, she kept her gaze steady on Mullins, her mind racing. Was she about to be forced out of her own home? She wasn't about to let that happen, not without a fight. But just as the tension reached its peak, something else shifted. Maya's calm demeanor didn't betray the storm brewing inside her. She had to act fast. She had a secret, one that was about to change everything. Maya's mind raced as she stood there, facing down the barrel of Officer Mullins's gun. The tension between them was thick, the air practically crackling with anticipation. Tyrone stood just behind her, eyes darting between the officer and his sister, his fists clenched at his sides. He had been through his own battles with the law, but this felt different, darker, more dangerous. "Step back, Tyrone," Maya said quietly, her voice steady, yet with a sense of urgency. Tyrone hesitated, sensing something in the way Maya held herself, something unspoken in the way she stared down Mullins. But he also knew his sister was no stranger to confrontations. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't scared, but Mullins was determined. His finger tightened on the trigger, his mind locked into the belief that he was in control, that this was just another routine stop. Maya's refusal to comply was only making him angrier. She was supposed to cower, supposed to beg for mercy, but she wasn't doing any of that. She was standing firm, like she had nothing to fear. "You really want to do this?" Mullins sneered, his gun unwavering in his hand. His eyes flickered from Maya to Tyrone. "I said move." Maya's heart was pounding, but her face remained calm. She had faced far worse in her life than this. She wasn't afraid. The officer's threats felt empty, like a child trying to scare an adult with a toy gun. Then, without warning, she took a single step forward, her voice clear and cold. "You don't have the right to do this. I've done nothing wrong." Mullins wasn't ready for this kind of resistance. His hand shook slightly as he steadied the gun in his grasp, the muscle memory of years of training kicking in. "I don't need a reason to detain you, lady," he spat, his voice rising in anger. "Now step aside, or I will arrest you." But Maya wasn't moving. She knew this was just the beginning of a larger fight, one she hadn't anticipated, but one she knew she would have to face head-on. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she refused to show any sign of weakness. Tyrone stepped forward, his own anger flaring. "You don't scare us," he said, his voice thick with conviction. "My sister's not going anywhere, and neither are you." Mullins' eyes flicked to Tyrone, sizing him up. He could feel the fire in both of them now. He knew that this could escalate quickly, but he didn't care. In his mind, they were just two more people to put in their place. He was the one with the badge, the gun, and the authority to control this situation, but Maya wasn't about to let him get away with it. As Mullins raised his gun slightly, she took a step back, her eyes locked on his. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing the cold metal of her phone. The officer didn't notice. He was too focused on her defiance, too caught up in the moment to notice the quiet exchange happening just under his nose. But Maya wasn't just any woman. She had been trained for moments like this, moments when everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. She had learned to stay calm, stay composed, and make the right move when it mattered most. Her fingers tapped the phone screen, her thumb hovering over the one contact that could change everything. Suddenly, Mullins' radio crackled, his partner's voice breaking through the silence. "Officer Mullins, you still good over there?" For a moment Mullins was distracted. His attention shifted from Maya to the radio, just long enough for Maya to press send on the text message. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she sent the message to the one person who could help her now. She wasn't just a regular citizen trying to survive this encounter. She was someone much more dangerous to Mullins, someone who could make his whole life unravel in an instant. Mullins, still distracted by the radio, didn't notice the shift in Maya's demeanor. The tension in his body relaxed for just a moment as he responded to his partner. "Yeah, I'm good. Just dealing with some resistance over here." But then, his attention snapped back to Maya as he heard the subtle click of a phone being placed on a hard surface. The sound was enough to send his nerves on edge once more. He looked at Maya, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What did you just do?" he demanded, his voice rising again. The gun was back in his hand, pointing straight at her. Maya stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "You'll find out soon enough." His pulse quickened. He was no longer sure what was going on, and that made him uncomfortable. Everything about Maya's calmness, her defiance, was messing with his head. He didn't know what she was playing at, but he wasn't going to let her take control of the situation. Maya could feel the air thickening. The seconds felt like hours, each one dragging on as she waited for the response from the other side. If this plan worked, Mullins wouldn't know what hit him. But just as the standoff reached its peak, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Mullins's head snapped up, his eyes darting toward the sound. Before flicking back to Maya, the sirens grew louder, and he knew backup was on the way. "What's this?" Mullins growled. "You called for backup? You're the one causing all this trouble." Maya didn't respond. Instead, she let the silence settle in, letting Mullins stew in his own frustration as the sirens grew nearer. Her plan was already set in motion. The wheels were turning, and soon Officer Mullins would know just who he was messing with. The backup arrived moments later, two cruisers screeching to a halt at the curb. Mullins tensed up, realizing he might have just gotten more than he bargained for. But it wasn't the backup he was worried about. It was what might happen next. Maya's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and for the first time a small smile crept across her face. The backup officers stepped out of their cars, their boots hitting the pavement with a thud that echoed down the quiet street. Officer Mullins turned toward them, a mixture of frustration and uncertainty flashing across his face. He had expected backup to calm the situation, but now it felt like things were slipping out of his control. The two officers, both younger and eager to prove themselves, looked to Mullins for guidance. They didn't know what had just happened, what had transpired between him and Maya. They just knew that the situation was tense, and their role was to ensure it didn't escalate further. One of the officers, a rookie named Jenkins, approached with his hand on his baton, scanning the scene. "What's going on, Officer Mullins?" he asked, his voice shaky but steady. Mullins shot him a look, his jaw clenched. "This woman is resisting arrest," he said, gesturing toward Maya, who was still standing defiantly in the doorway. "I was trying to detain her, but she's making this more difficult than it needs to be." Maya didn't flinch at the mention of resisting arrest. Her focus had shifted entirely. The smile that had tugged at her lips was gone, replaced by the quiet determination that had always guided her through tough situations. She could feel the backup officers growing anxious, sensing the shift in power. "Don't move," Mullins barked at Maya, taking another step toward her, his gun still aimed in her direction. But Maya wasn't moving. Her hands were steady at her sides as she glanced at the officers who had just arrived. She didn't trust them. She didn't trust Mullins. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, she felt the weight of the decision she had made, the risk of it all. "Officer Mullins," Maya said calmly, her voice a little louder now, enough to command attention. "I want you to listen to me carefully. I'm not going anywhere unless you're prepared to deal with the consequences." Mullins stared at her, incredulous. "What consequences?" he demanded, his voice rising. "You're not in a position to be making demands." She took a deep breath and let the silence settle around them for a moment. "I think you should know who you're dealing with." The officers glanced at each other, confused. Jenkins looked back at Mullins, sensing the tension, but unsure of the dynamics at play. He had never seen his senior officer so rattled. Something wasn't adding up. Maya's voice dropped, but it was clear and unyielding. "I am an FBI agent. My name is Maya Williams, and you are about to regret this decision." Mullins' expression froze, disbelief flashing across his face. Maya, the woman he'd targeted with his gun for something he thought was just another routine bust, an FBI agent. The younger officers were visibly taken aback. "Wait, what?" Jenkins stammered. His eyes darted back and forth between Maya and Mullins, unsure how to process the revelation. "I'm giving you a chance, Officer Mullins," Maya continued, her voice now firm but controlled. "You can stand down, release me, and walk away without this escalating. But if you choose to ignore me, the consequences will be far greater than you can imagine." Mullins hesitated, the reality of the situation sinking in. He hadn't expected this. The anger that had propelled him to take control of the situation seemed to evaporate, replaced by a sinking feeling in his gut. The thought that he had just pointed a gun at someone of such importance, someone capable of bringing his world crashing down, hit him like a slap to the face. "You're bluffing," Mullins finally muttered, but there was a trace of uncertainty in his voice that hadn't been there before. Maya didn't flinch. She knew that Mullins wasn't about to back off easily. Check my credentials if you want, I'll wait. The two younger officers hesitated, but the tension in the air was palpable. The sound of distant sirens from other responding units only seemed to amplify the gravity of the moment. Mullins knew that if they escalated this too far, it would be a disaster for him and his entire department. The last thing he wanted was for this incident to blow up into something bigger, something he couldn't control. "I don't have time for games, Williams," Mullins growled, trying to regain some of the authority he had lost in the exchange. He was stalling, hoping that Maya would back down, but she wasn't giving an inch. Maya remained calm, her phone still in her hand. She knew it was only a matter of time before Mullins realized the full scope of what he had done. He had made a terrible misstep, and now Maya was about to make him pay for it, legally and professionally. "You can call whoever you want to back you up," Maya said, her voice low but unwavering. "But you've already crossed a line, Officer Mullins. I don't think you fully understand just how far you've gone." The tension thickened as Mullins stood there, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that Maya had anticipated this moment, that she had planned for it. And then it clicked. The phone, the calm demeanor, the way she had handled the situation so far. Maya was no ordinary civilian, and this wasn't just a simple encounter. "I'm giving you one last chance," Maya added, her eyes now cold and unblinking. "Stand down and we'll move on from this." "But I'm not backing down." Mullins' grip on his gun tightened, but for the first time the weight of the situation felt too heavy for him to carry alone. His partner Jenkins stepped forward cautiously, looking between Maya and Mullins. The silence was suffocating, the moment stretched to its breaking point. "I think we need to call this in," Jenkins said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He had seen enough, and he knew this was no ordinary arrest. Mullins shot him a warning glare but couldn't argue. The rookie was right. It was time to call this in, before things got any worse. Maya stood still, her hands clasped together, waiting for Mullins to make his next move. She could feel the world around her shifting. This was no longer just a confrontation. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that would shake Mullins to his core. The sound of the sirens grew louder, and within moments 2 more police cruisers pulled up alongside Officer Mullins's car. Their flashing lights cast an eerie red and blue glow over the street, further intensifying the already charged atmosphere. Mullins glanced at the new officers who had arrived, their expressions ranging from confusion to concern. The situation had escalated far beyond what he had anticipated. He could feel the heat rising on the back of his neck, his palms beginning to sweat as he tried to regain control of the situation. His gaze flickered nervously between Maya and the 2 new officers, who were now standing by, waiting for instructions. "What's going on here, Mullins?" One of the new officers, a tall woman with short cropped hair, asked, her hand resting on her hip. Mullins opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He couldn't bring himself to admit what had just happened. This wasn't just another routine arrest gone sideways, it was a complete disaster. Maya Williams wasn't just a civilian. She wasn't just another person to push around. She was an FBI agent, and if the entire department found out about this, his career would be over. I'm handling this," Mullins said, his voice shaky, his authority now a far cry from the commanding tone he had tried to project earlier. His eyes darted between Maya and the new officers. They could see the hesitation in him, the cracks in his facade, and it didn't sit well with them. Maya took a step forward, the soft click of her boots on the concrete echoing in the silence. "I'll handle this from here," she said, her voice calm but firm. She looked directly at the female officer. "This situation is more complicated than you think. You don't know what's really happening here." The officer, still visibly confused, exchanged a quick glance with her partner before nodding. "All right, we'll stand down for now," she said, but it was clear she was still uncertain. She couldn't figure out why Mullins, the senior officer, hadn't de-escalated the situation sooner. Maya didn't waste time. She turned back to Mullins, who was still standing rigid, his hand still close to his gun. "You're not in control here anymore, Mullins," she said. "I need you to step aside." Now, the words hit Mullins harder than he expected. He had always prided himself on his control, on the way he commanded a room, a situation. But now, facing Maya, all that control felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He looked down at his gun, the weight of it suddenly feeling far too heavy for him to bear. He had always carried it with ease, but now, the gun felt like a symbol of everything he had done wrong. He swallowed hard and slowly took a step back, his hand moving away from the holster. The new officers watched in silence as Maya took her place at the center of the situation, her calmness almost unnerving. "Mullins," she said, her voice colder now, "this isn't just about me, this is about you. Your actions here today, pointing your gun at me, trying to force me out of my own home, will have consequences, legal ones, and I won't let you get away with it." Mullins opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The enormity of the situation was crashing down on him, and he couldn't deny it any longer. He had crossed a line. He had made a huge mistake, one that wasn't going to be brushed under the rug. The rookie officer, Jenkins, stepped forward hesitantly, looking between Mullins and Maya. I think we should call in a higher authority, get someone from the department to handle this," he suggested, his voice shaking slightly. Mullins glared at him, but the suggestion made sense. The situation was spiraling out of control, and he didn't have the strength or the confidence to fix it. He was no longer the one in charge. Maya nodded in agreement. "That's exactly what needs to happen," she said. "But it's not just any authority you'll need. It's someone who can handle this at the federal level. I'm not letting you walk away from this mistake." Mullins knew the truth of her words, but he didn't want to admit it. He had gotten himself into a mess that he couldn't easily untangle, and he wasn't sure how to get out of it. His mind raced, and a part of him wanted to scream, to lash out at Maya for making him feel so small, so powerless, but he couldn't. "Fine," Mullins said finally, his voice hoarse. "I'll call it in, but you better have proof of who you are, Williams. I'm not going to let this slide just because you say so." Maya smiled grimly, her eyes never leaving his. "You'll see the proof soon enough." As Mullins pulled out his radio and called in to request a higher-level officer, Maya stood silently, her mind already racing ahead to the next step. This was only the beginning. She had prepared for this moment, but she couldn't let her guard down, not for a second. Mullins' call was quick, but the dispatch response was even quicker. The calm, professional voice on the other end of the line told him that an FBI agent would be arriving shortly to handle the situation. The silence between the officers was deafening as they awaited the arrival of the agent. Maya remained composed, but inside her heart was pounding. She knew the moment that agent arrived, everything would change. The sound of tires screeching echoed down the street, signaling the arrival of the backup that Maya had been waiting for. The headlights of an unmarked black car cut through the night, casting long shadows across the pavement as it came to a stop in front of Maya's house. A man in a dark suit stepped out of the vehicle, his expression unreadable. His eyes scanned the scene, immediately locking onto Maya with an almost imperceptible nod. He was here, and that meant Mullins' world was about to implode. The new agent's presence seemed to change the entire atmosphere around them. He was calm, composed, and immediately authoritative, qualities that Maya recognized from her own training. His sharp suit contrasted with the tense street scene, and as he approached, he took one brief glance at Officer Mullins before his gaze settled firmly on Maya. "I'm Agent Harris," the man said in a low, controlled voice, his gaze unwavering as he stepped into the unfolding chaos. "I'm here to take over. Maya, I assume?" Maya nodded, her posture straightening as a sense of relief washed over her. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she could finally set the record straight and bring the entire situation to light. "I'm Maya Williams, FBI Special Agent," she said calmly, her tone leaving no room for doubt. Agent Harris didn't waste any time. "Mullins," he said, his voice cold but polite, "step aside." Mullins flinched as if struck by the words. His fingers trembled as they loosened their grip on the radio, and he slowly took a step back. The power, the authority that he had clung to all his life, seemed to slip away from him in that one moment. The weight of his actions, the gravity of what he had just done, was beginning to crash down on him. Maya could see it, the small, almost imperceptible tremor in Mullins' hands, the way his body language had shifted from that of a man in control to one who was now entirely out of his depth. "You've made a serious mistake, Mullins," Harris said, not looking at him but addressing him as though Mullins wasn't even worthy of a direct conversation. The words were deliberate, calculated. Maya could feel the power shift. "I've been briefed, and we're going to handle this from here." Mullins wanted to argue. He wanted to scream that he had done his job, that Maya had been resisting, that he had the right to act as he had, but he couldn't. Every time he tried to formulate a defense, the nagging reality of Maya's identity weighed heavily on him. She wasn't just a civilian or some person off the street. She was a special agent, trained, capable, and beyond reproach. He couldn't fight that truth. And now, with Agent Harris here, the case was moving beyond his control. I had a tip," Mullins stammered, his voice suddenly sounding smaller, more vulnerable. She looked suspicious. I had to act. I was just doing my job." Harris's eyes flickered to Mullins, his expression stoic. "You crossed a line, Mullins. You aimed a weapon at an FBI agent without cause. You forced her out of her home. That's an abuse of power." The words hung in the air like a thick fog, and Mullins felt himself shrinking under their weight. The reality of his actions was sinking in. He had no justification for what he had done. The job, the badge, the gun, It all meant nothing now. He was facing an FBI investigation, and worse, the consequences of his own arrogance and prejudice. Maya watched the interaction unfold in front of her, but she remained silent, giving Agent Harris the floor. This was his domain now, and he was handling it in the way she had expected. She had anticipated that Mullins would try to defend his actions, and she had prepared for it. Harris turned to Maya, his gaze softening slightly. "You're free to go, Maya. I'll take it from here." For the first time since the confrontation had begun, Maya allowed herself a small sigh of relief. She wasn't out of the woods yet, but with Agent Harris taking over, she knew that things would be handled properly. She had done what she came here to do. She had exposed Mullins for what he was, nothing more than a racist cop with too much power and too little oversight. Mullins stood frozen in place, his eyes flickering between Harris and Maya, but he didn't make a move to speak again. He felt like a man stripped bare, standing before the world with nothing left to hide behind. "Agent Harris," Maya said, breaking the silence, "I want to make sure this goes through the proper channels. I want this to be handled as seriously as it should be." Harris nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We'll make sure everything is documented, Maya. Don't worry, this is going to the right people." As Harris spoke, Maya could feel the weight lifting off her shoulders, even though the situation wasn't over. She knew there was a long road ahead, paperwork, investigations, consequences, but she had already won the most important battle. Mullins had been exposed, and his career was as good as over. Maya glanced one last time at Officer Mullins, her gaze meeting his with an icy clarity. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years of experience. "You'll never look at your badge the same way again." She turned and walked toward Agent Harris, her heels clicking on the pavement as the sound of sirens faded in the distance. The backup officers had already begun dispersing, their presence no longer necessary. The situation had been diffused, but Maya knew that this wasn't just about one racist cop. This was part of a much larger system that needed to change, and she was committed to being the one to make sure it did. As she got into the unmarked car, Harris followed, and they drove off into the night. Maya had been forced into a dangerous situation, but she had come out victorious, and though she knew her work wasn't over, she couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. Mullins would face the consequences of his actions, and Maya Williams would be a part of making sure that justice prevailed. The night had ended, but the story was far from over. For Officer Mullins, the real punishment was only just beginning.